And hello, everybody. That red light is on, which means this week's episode of Under Review is officially live. I want to thank you all so much for being here today to check this episode out. If you could do us all a favor and drop a like on this video, it would be greatly appreciated. My name is Joe DeRosa. You could find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. And joining me today is the one, the only, Bruce Nolan, who is here to help me recap the Bills' turbulent October. So buckle up and let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
And once again, everybody, thank you so much for being here. I am super excited about this episode. And a part of the reason I'm super excited, apart from the obvious catharsis and joy that we're going to be exploring, is because of my established, esteemed, wonderful guest, Mr. Bruce Nolan. Thank you for being here today.
Mr. DeRosa, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. And more importantly, thank you, the Buffalo Bills, because we established that I was going to be on the show before they won. So it was awfully nice of them to look out for me in this way and to make sure that they won the game before I was on the show.
Yes, very kind of them to at least give us a positive, I guess, a positive wrap up. Very gracious. And Tim, good morning. And Cecilia, hey, she may or may not be my girlfriend. We're just going to pretend that that's a random stranger. No, thanks, Cease. I appreciate it. But Bruce, let's get into it. We have a lot to cover today and only so much time to cover it. But it was a whirlwind of a month, a lot of expectation, especially starting it with a really nice win over the Miami Dolphins. Then London hits and the Jacksonville game comes up. It's an ugly showing from the Buffalo Bills, who you think, all right, disjointed, disoriented, unfortunate, whatever, move on. But then it lingers and you see offensive woes and even a few defensive woes hit in that Giant game that they truthfully from the skin of their teeth won. Then they move on to New England and disappoint there. Now we go to this Tampa game, and the ship starts to turn in the right direction. Let me hear your thoughts on this month in general, what you feel about this team going forward.
The NFL football season is a roller coaster. We know this. But every time it hits, we still act like we don't know it. It's weird because at the end of the year, we go, man, twists and turns. What a story, right? But then we're in the twists and turns. It's inevitable that everything is going to continue on the way that it has always been. So if you are on a hot streak and you are absolutely demolishing teams, you go, well, this is just the way it's going to be. This is normal. And if you're being disappointed, if you're disappointed in London and then disappointed in a win against the Giants and then disappointed against the Patriots, you assume, well, this is the way it's always going to be. It's always going to be whatever it currently is. And that's one of the hilarious things about the NFL football season is that we say it's so short. We say, oh man, it's so short. We talk about supply and demand when it comes to the NFL and how the reason why it's so popular is because every game matters and it's so important and it's such a long season, but it's also a really short season. It's really strange because on one hand, we acknowledge that it's a long season and then at the same time we go, oh, well, we're going to get caught up in the shortness of it, which is very odd. There's a very strange thing. And I think it has to do with the spacing between games. And when it comes to the spacing between games, in the NBA and the NHL and the MLB, you can wash bad tastes out of your mouth quickly, and you can wash good tastes out of your mouth really quickly because you can turn the page. And so you're forced to take a long view in the MLB, in the NHL, in the NBA. It's not about a game. It's about a trend. It's about a stretch. But in the NFL, we have so much time to marinate in a win or a loss that it becomes ingrained in us. We should actually take the MLB and NHL and NBA approach to the NFL and deal with trends. And so after 3 disappointing games against the Jaguars, the Giants, and then the Patriots, that's a trend. It was completely reasonable for you to wake up the morning after the game against the New England Patriots and go, okay, I'm a little worried. It was 3 games. So I completely understand how we deal in months. I think it's really good that you talked about the month as a whole, because if ever there was a month that encapsulates the scenario that comes along with the season being long and there being a roller coaster, it's this month. Right at the beginning of the month, you're on the top of the world. Yeah. Tick, 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 and then all the way down. And then, of course, when you come up from that dip on a roller coaster, you never go as high as you were at the beginning. So ironically enough, if ever there was a metaphor that held on to the whole roller coaster thing, it was this month in the Buffalo Bills.
I completely agree with you. And first and foremost, thank you for the roller coaster metaphor. You have absolutely blessed our viewers and listeners with a visualization of you on a roller coaster. So I'm going to remember that. But I'm so glad you bring up a few points. One, about the pacing, because it is a lot easier to kind of wash things off in baseball, hockey, these sports that give you consistent games, because you get the satisfaction of knowing that, one, if my team, which could be a very good team, has an ugly performance, they can right the ship tomorrow or in 2 days. And that's okay. And that happens to even the best teams. When you look at football, football is so tricky because you get the sample size each week of about a couple hours, and then you move on to the next week or whenever the next game is. In this case, it was Thursday. And for Bills fans with expectations of really grandeur, which they should have, because we have often talked about how this could be a Super Bowl team each and every year. We have seen this kind of really, I guess if you want to call it, justified panic, because these expectations are not being met when they were set, as you said, so high because of such a great win against a really good Dolphins team. And I think what happens is each year, you look at the kind of expectations versus reality on full display and the short-term memory that comes with it. Because when the season ends and you have all this downtime to project, to speculate, to kind of assume what is going to happen, and we all do it, I do it, I've done it on this show, we then build this foundation of what we're looking for and forget that football is just a variable, difficult, complex, ugly game that oftentimes will not meet exactly what you're expecting, but in turn creates these kind of skewed perspectives, even in situations where things are, not the worst in the world. And I think October is a great lens to kind of view how we should evaluate football and the back and forth nature of it. But Bruce, before we move on to our first real topic of discussion, I just want to ask you to kind of go over our most recent game, because it's worth talking about. They beat Tampa Bay. Again, kind of by the skin of their teeth, but it didn't feel that way. What are your thoughts on that game and how it kind of bodes for the Bills going forward, especially as they are about to play a very tough Cincinnati Bengals team?
I'm going to pull a veteran move at this point. I am going to loop in the question that you just asked me with a comment that we just got in the comment section from Tim A. And Tim asks, do you think there was an organizational overreaction to slow down the offense to compensate for the injury-riddled defense? I think that it is very reasonable for a lot of head coaches to try to protect their defense by slowing down their offense, and I think that's a mistake. I think what you saw from the Buffalo Bills, and overall, the Buffalo Bills scored 24 points against the Bucs. They scored 25 against the Patriots. They, from an EPA per play standpoint, they were actually better against the Patriots than they were against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But there is value. This is really important. There is value to scoring it earlier. We say things like, well, it wasn't really that difference. We just scored it earlier. No. Don't poo-poo that. There's value to scoring it earlier. Do you know how you really protect your defense? Boat race a team. That's how you actually protect a defense. You don't slow it down to protect a defense. You slow it down to minimize an offense. Either you're minimizing your own or you're minimizing theirs. And so if you have Nathan Peterman and they have Patrick Mahomes, well then, yeah, okay, let's slow it down. Let's try and limit the amount of possessions, because this larger the amount of possessions, the larger chance that the superior offense is going to start to separate. That's the way it works. So by all means, protect your defense. But I do think that organizations, and I think the Bills in the past, have made the mistake of believing that the way you protect your defense is to slow it down. No. The way you protect your defense is to boat race a team. Play from ahead. Because the best thing you can do for your defense is eliminate their ability on offense to have options. The more options they have, the more difficult it is for your defense. Do you know what limits their options? If you're up by 3 scores, that limits their options. So I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game is a great example of this, because on one hand, we say, well, the offense really wasn't that different. Well, yeah, okay. In totality, that's true. But from a game script standpoint, there is value to scoring it earlier. And so the Buffalo Bills, the reason why it felt different, the reason why it felt better is because there is a scenario where you were dictating to the defense. You were saying, no, we're up. You're going to have to pass at that point. And even if they have to check down to Rachaad White 15 times, they'll do it. That's fine. But it took them 87 years to drive the field. And the reason that is valuable is because you knew they were going to have to pass, which means you can play pass, which means you can make Baker Mayfield go, fine, 14 times and hope you get lucky on some penalties to sustain a drive, which is what they did. So I think that Tim's comment and also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game go together, because I do think that there's value in understanding and establishing that even though in totality the offense looks similar or maybe even a little better, there is value to scoring earlier. And I think that when we say it felt better, that's what we're really feeling.
Well, yeah, because they came out of the gates hot and they were answering a lot of questions about how their offense was performing over the past few weeks. And I've said it so many times, Bruce, and this is going to correlate into my point to respond to this, is I think the biggest issue that plagues this offense isn't so much the fact that they are trying to be methodical, because I understand from a fundamental principle that methodical offense is difficult. It's tricky to execute and you have to be right. But I've also seen several examples of this team being able to execute it effectively against teams that they've really had the kind of game plan of, I don't want them to try and use their biggest strength against us. So when you looked at Vegas, Josh Jacobs was really the game plan there, and Devontae Adams, but I worry more about Jacobs underneath. They have these long, sustained drives that they're finishing. You look at the game against Miami. Miami's running game is its bread and butter. They have elite receiving weapons. They are a complementary offense. But when you looked at the way that Mostert and Achane were playing up those weeks prior, the idea is we don't want them to have the time to try and run the ball on us. And if they do, we'll be in position. So they sustain these really well methodical drives and end up scoring enough points to, like you said, Bruce, not at the start, but at least establish that this offense was here. It was present. You have to respect it. Your defense is going to struggle against it. And therefore, the crux of your offense is less effective because the time is of the essence to keep up with the Bills, who are taking you off the field. You do see some of the flaws in the methodology with this offense when you get into that London game and you get into that Giants game, where a lot of pressure does end up getting turned on the defense. However, where I stand on it is I do believe that there is balance to be had in explosion and in methodical offense. I do believe in the idea that it's okay to go with what you're good at, to allow Josh to run, to allow Josh to throw deep, to take advantage of what defenses are playing up. However, I think where this all boils down to is I'm not so much viewing it as an organizational overreaction. I'm viewing it as we have entered a stretch of the year where this offense is now facing adversity for, truth be told, outside of the Jets game, the first real time of a long stretch. And I think because of that, you are now seeing that they need to make adjustments. And I think that this is just part of the course for a year. Remember, Bruce, last year, we were flying high on all cylinders. By the time we got into November, that's when things started taking a negative turn. Allen's injury matters, but you looked at that Jets game and you looked at that Vikings game and there were cracks and they had to overcome it. I think this year, I wouldn't so much call it as an overreaction. I would call it a, hey, stretch of the season, teams are now beginning to defend us differently, and we are now beginning to attack them differently. And I think you're going to see that carry forward. And real fast, Bruce, before we continue, this transitions into our next topic. But Roy says, I have a hard time believing McDermott would tell the offense to slow down. And I agree with this. I don't think Sean McDermott is fully to blame for this offense as much as I think it's just execution. I think it's play calling, Josh Allen, and just some certain moments like key drops that affect kind of the outlook of this team and how they're approaching games. So do you agree with this, Bruce, or is there a different mindset?
I see it a little differently from you. I do think that there's a very real possibility that McDermott wanted to protect his badly injured defense. And I do think that there is a learning curve when it comes to Ken Dorsey and the inclusion of more 12 personnel this year. And I think that that kind of correlated. And one of the things I think is interesting is we need to separate in our head tempo and throwing the ball from personnel usage. I think one of the things that we do is we have a tendency to whatever priors we had, we just carry it forward whenever stimuli changes. So if you were anti-12 personnel and then you saw the Bills play better in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, assuming that you actually do think they play better on offense, which we already talked about, scoring earlier is better. But if you already thought that, then you're going to go, look, it was the 12. Well, was it really? Because the Bills, first off, 12 was never the primary methodology for the Buffalo Bills. I don't know where that narrative came from, the idea that they were like a base 12 personnel offense. They weren't. They were wearing more of it than they did last year. But one of the things we need to understand is that you can have tempo and you can throw the ball over the yard and still be in 12. Like those two things are not correlated at all. Yeah. So I think the thing that we saw from the Buffalo Bills is we saw tempo and we saw a little bit more neutral pass rate against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is good, but that has nothing to do with the personnel. I think the biggest thing is that you saw Dalton Kincaid go back to 80+% of snaps, which matters. I think that one of the things we're kind of missing in the whole 12 and 11 conversation is we're missing when the decision is Kincaid or Shakir, that is different from a 12 to 11 standpoint, that is different than Knox or Shakir. That's a very different thing. Because listen, no matter if you're a diehard Dawson Knox fan, you're still probably going to believe that Dalton Kincaid is a superiorly skilled player. And that's just the way it is. So I think that there's a learning curve with implementing more of that as far as what you can do with it. And yeah, I think that's part of playing complementary football. I think that's one of the reasons why he keeps talking about it is I do think that there's a possibility that a deliberate decision was made on pace. The Buffalo Bills were slower this year, the entire year. They were 23rd in pace per Pat Thorman, when last year they were 14th. The previous year they were 5th. So I don't think it's an accident. I mean, unless you think they're accidentally slowing down, it comes from somebody. So to Roy, I would say, okay, so either Ken Dorsey decided to slow down, Sean McDermott decided to slow down, or it happened by accident. Those are the three options. So I'm going to say accident's probably not it, right? Which means it's either a decision being made by Dorsey or it's a decision being made by McDermott. And when we talk about philosophically, because head coaches don't call plays on offense unless they're the actual play caller, but philosophically, they all have input. That's just the way it works in all organizations. And it feels to me like pace is part of philosophy. So for me, I think it's reasonable. I think it's a very reasonable connection to make that McDermott would have something to do with the pace on offense.
And I don't disagree with any of that. Your head coach has to have input. I think I'm really glad you bring up 11 to 12. We'll get more into the offense later, but I'm just glad you made that point because I think people are just chomping at the bit to worship Thursday night's performance as a testament to why they shouldn't be in 12. When the reality is, one, they couldn't be because their only other available tight end was Reggie Gilliam. And two, it was a short week and the up-tempo and the game script that they had was really a result of we have 3 days to prepare. Why don't we just try to make this a quick-minded attacking offense where we get in rhythm because we can't really spend as much time to prepare anything that complex against a really good defense who has notoriously held teams over the past few weeks to 16 to 20. And I think the previous matchup was like low 20s or late teens. Tampa had a good defense. That's how they attacked it. It worked out, and that's great. I also think there's still some of those same lingering issues. And when we talk about the pacing and when we talk about McDermott, we're going to establish more conversation about McDermott. The one thing I will say is I think you do have to look at last season as a reference as to the why they are approaching games this way. One thing, Bruce, that I have heard from numerous people, and it's a sentiment I believed. And again, when I say what I'm about to say, it is not me saying that you have to remove running, that you have to remove quarterback designed runs, deep passes, anything like that. But I do believe that the Bills were in a box last year. And I think when they got to the playoffs, they got exposed by a defense that read the way they play, all of their tendencies, and there was no alternative to get out of that. And they had to sit in their box and try to play from their box. And they ended up losing and losing big because a team read them like a book, executed well, and completely dominated them both up front and in the back end. So to me, what McDermott is trying to establish isn't the way people are saying that he's, in my opinion, overly conservative. I think it's, I don't want to be stuck in one type of offense and limit this team with all the potential in the world and all the talent in the world, but rather create this rotating tandem of attack-minded offense where we can hit you in different personnels and also run out of them, which I think is a big part of what they're trying to do this year. Because again, running the ball, it takes time. It keeps the clock moving. It's a different approach, and it doesn't always work. And those types of plays not working still take time off the clock versus a pass that stops it. So for me, where I'm having kind of this disconnect on the discourse, and let's roll into the topic on Sean McDermott, is really that I don't think trying to make a concerted effort to run the ball more, to have different approaches offensively to attack defenses is particularly a bad thing. But I think when execution flummoxes and you have these games where they're just not in sync or in rhythm, you see a glaring flaw when you rely on it too much. And that's where I'll understand people's sentiment. But Bruce, let's talk about Sean McDermott more. There has been a lot of really negative discourse over this past month, and he's the leader of the ship. The defense has had some bad performances, and ultimately injuries matter, but there's just been some mindsets from people where they are just completely off the wagon on Sean McDermott, and some people that want to stay on it. What is your opinion of him, especially after this last month?
I said in the offseason when I was ranking head coaches that Sean McDermott was, quote, good enough, end quote. And that's all I've really ever cared about when it comes to a head coach is, are they good enough? Can you win a Super Bowl with this coach? And I think you can win a Super Bowl with Sean McDermott. I don't think he's a top 5 head coach. I think I had him like 9th. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 9th or something like that in the NFL. It was above average, but it wasn't like high. And I'm fine with that. I still feel all the same things I felt before. I think one of the most encouraging things about Sean McDermott is he talked a lot in the press conference before the Tampa Bay game about how one of Josh Allen's strengths was his ability to play in tempo. And then in the Buccaneers, they came out and played in tempo. This is important. Being bad at something is not a disqualifier in all aspects of life. So I got married to my wife a long time ago, and my wife was not a good arguer. Arguing is a skill. This is really important. Not a good arguer. She would do all the things that you're not supposed to do in an argument. So if you've ever been to any, counseling or any sort of, discussions about relationships and things like that, you got into professional advice. One of the things that we do in relationships all the time is that we put ourselves in a scenario where we do global terminology when we should use specific terminology. There's a difference between why didn't you take out the garbage and you never take out the garbage. Those are not the same things. And so it's important to note that being bad at something is not necessarily a disqualifier, but the growth mindset matters. So Sean McDermott talks about it a lot. So I think the ability of the offense to pivot from looking very, very, very different, right? Being very slow against every other team and being very fast against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that matters. Because if Sean McDermott didn't have a growth mindset, he'd go, no, this is going to work. I'm going to do it. But he said in the press conference, hey, I think that Josh Allen's really good in tempo. And then they came out and played in tempo. And yes, the play calling was not as complex, but there is an inverse correlation between speed and complexity that I need people to understand when it comes to NFL offenses. If you want to go fast, you are less complicated. If you want to be complicated, you are less fast. It's just, that's the way it is, because you can't be swapping out personnel groupings and having a ton of motion in an offense and also have it be fast. Look at offenses like Kyle Shanahan does not run a fast offense at all. It's never been fast because it relies upon a lot of different personnel groupings, and it relies on a lot of shifting and a lot of motion. You cannot have the snap to snap times, the snap stopwatch. Then you can't really have that if you have a ton of time in between swapping out personnel groupings, swapping out players, doing motions, doing shifts. You can't do that. So you gotta pick one. Like, you can't have both. You can't have a really complicated offense that throws a lot of stuff at you as far as personnel groupings, motion shifts, and then also have it go fast. And so I think that what we saw at the beginning was Ken Dorsey was throwing a lot of stuff at people. We saw 12, we saw 0-1, we saw 21, we saw 11, we saw 13, we saw a 6th offensive lineman. We saw a lot of stuff. We did not see that against the Buccaneers. They went faster, but they were markedly less complicated. And to your point, talking about the Cincinnati game last year, is that something where we're going to be really happy about the pace, and then we're going to wish we had a little bit more complexity and more things in the toolbox later on? It's not always just said better and worse. It's sometimes just qualitatively different. And so when I look at Sean McDermott and I look at the ability to pivot on a short week to a very, very different look of offense, things like that give me encouragement. Now, I'm not going to sit here and be a cheerleader, right, for Sean McDermott, because I wanted him to go for it twice on Thursday night. And I make no apologies for this. If the win probability is within 1%, right, if it's really close, I want the ball in the elite quarterback's hands, and I don't want it in the non-elite quarterback's hands. That's the way that I view. Now, I understand that the script of the game was that your defense had been holding them down. I understand that. And there's an argument. I'm not going to scream and yell at the people who didn't want to go for it. But I'm also not going to somehow pretend that because they didn't go for it and it worked out, that I somehow didn't want to go for it, because I did. And I have criticisms of Sean McDermott. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't, but I absolutely do, 100%. But I feel completely identical with Sean McDermott now as I did a month ago, because all the same things that I already knew about Sean McDermott, I've seen over the last month.
Yes, that ending point I agree with. I think we as fans, and it's not anyone in this chat, it's not you, Bruce, it's not anyone specific, just some sentiment I have seen online, which is a dangerous place to be after a Bills win or loss, it turns out. I think there needs to be some deep breaths and a perspective of where we are at in the year, what we are dealing with, and then looking at each game in a vacuum as opposed to bleeding them into one another. And that's something that, emotion will trump logic every single time, because it's so hard to kick when your blood is boiling, when tensions are high, when hormones are rushing. That is just what happens. And when you watch it and when you see things go wrong, finger pointing comes out. It's just a part of it. I have done it. I am not a saint. When it comes to Sean McDermott, however, I do feel that there are criticisms that are completely valid, and criticisms that I feel we can kind of look at and say, well, is this really all on him? And I think the point that I want to address mainly when I bring up Sean McDermott and when I talk on this show is blame is non-binary. It's not something that goes to one person all the time. As I've mentioned before, football is complicated. You have too many different mixed personalities, skill sets, talents, and mindsets all going at once. It is a machine, both offensively, defensively, and on special teams, where if one cog is not spinning as fast as the others, those other cogs slow down. When it comes to Sean McDermott, I do believe that a head coach is the face of the team. He should take accountability no matter what, just because you have to as a coach. That doesn't necessarily mean it's your fault, but it does mean that I need to see you be a leader in those moments where adversity strikes. And I do think Sean McDermott does that. I think when you talk about criticisms in both personnel decisions, maybe in certain moments, in certain games, letting clock bleed out too much, taking untimely defensive timeouts, those are things I can look at Sean McDermott and say, come on, get better with this. When we get to the playoffs, when we play a good team, I can't see that. But where I think the blame is being a bit too hyperbolic is when things, just simply an execution perspective, go wrong and all of it falls on McDermott. And that includes defense. I think the New England game is a great example of why I'm pumping the brakes on totally blaming him. Matt Milano is not playing. Daquan Jones is not playing. Trey White is not playing. This defense is littered with holes. Sean McDermott has to use what's on his roster and put these players in the best position they can to succeed. The people he views the best are the ones he's going to put out there. When a missed assignment happens and Dorian Williams is carrying the wrong part of the field and there's a wide open hole for Kendrick Bourne, that doesn't mean Sean McDermott called the wrong play. It means execution, despite teaching, isn't working. And whether you want to blame the coach on that is up to you. I personally don't, because I think Dorian Williams is a rookie, and part of the learning curve in a very difficult sport is making mistakes. But what I need to see, and I'm glad you bring this up, Bruce, I'm calling back to your point about a growth mindset, is from game to game, how do you change? What changes, right? This Buccaneers game, granted, they haven't been a great offense, but you saw a defensive performance reminiscent of the start of the year. They were dominant for most of the game. And of course, penalties, which is something I do think I can blame my coach on a little bit, happen and sustain a drive that didn't need to be sustained. But ultimately, I saw that growth mindset from Sean McDermott. And Bruce, I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with you on the punting decision here, because I think that in that moment, we are so quick to say, well, why didn't you go for it on fourth down? Why didn't you do this on fourth down? My problem is, why are you on fourth down? Why are you playing for a fourth down? Why are you in this position where you have to make this difficult decision? What is the execution? Like, where is this going wrong that we have to end up in this spot? Because if you don't believe, as Ken Dorsey or as a player, that they're going to keep the ball in your hands, then why are we dialing up plays where we have to throw it underneath if we're not confident? And also, when we talk about these decisions to punt, we got to look at some of the things that led to that point, including the special teams penalties that lead to losing about 10 yards on the play, which, had they gotten that at the spot Hardy returned it to, puts them in field goal range and puts the game away. Now, yes, do I like aggression? Absolutely. And this is the thing I'm trying to establish is, I like one thing doesn't mean I'm automatically removing the other. If Sean McDermott decided to go for it on both of those plays, I'm fine with it. Go for it. And if you get it, great. But I do believe that punting in that situation generated opportunity. And Bruce, in both of those instances, the Bucs had a 3-and-out, and Jordan Poyer dropped a pick six that ices the game. So where I disagree is not so much that it's a McDermott. I just don't think it's the wrong call. And I know you're not attacking me or saying anything like that. But I just think when we talk about fan perspective of Sean McDermott, we have to look at all of this context and not just react with emotion, but use logic to try and dictate what is really the underlying issue or who deserves the praise. And in this moment with Sean McDermott after this game, I didn't walk away from that angry at him. I walked away encouraged for the direction of this team and the mindset that I am trying to play to the strength with. I thought in this game was the defense, because also after the first drive of the third quarter, the offense could not finish drives, Bruce. They couldn't. And I think that bodes into that decision. And I think that just further proves that this offense still has work to do. So I'm going to ask you, any final thoughts on Sean McDermott before we move on to the next topic?
Well, first off, if I've learned anything from the internet, it's that you and I have disagreed. So therefore I hate you. I'm going to go ahead and drop off your show and then badmouth you all over the
See ya.
So if that, I just want you to know, because you and I obviously can't disagree on that.
Terrible.
I think that one of the things I want to touch on, it just came to me when you're talking about coaching and execution. And that is, we blame coaching decisions on coaching, and then we blame execution decisions on coaching. And I really, truly believe that the people who blame execution issues on coaching have never coached anybody in their life. I truly believe that. So I coached football. I was in leadership positions before. And one of the things that I talk to about with my players and with my employees and people like that is, if you do what I tell you to do, the way I tell you to do it, and it doesn't work out, then it's my fault. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, the way I tell you to do it, and it doesn't work out, then it's your fault. Because we can only isolate the variable of the plan if the plan is actually followed. We can only isolate the variable of the scheme or the play call or whatever it is if the play call is actually followed. If you don't follow the play call, we don't have any idea if the play call is actually correct or not, because you didn't do it. And so this idea that, well, Dorian Williams missed this whole, well, that's Sean McDermott's job to get him to not miss a tackle. It's Sean McDermott's job to not have him be in the wrong gap. Dude, have you ever coached anybody before in your life? No matter how many times you do this, and you drill this into their head, they're going to screw up. They're young. That's what they do. Even veterans screw up occasionally. It's just a matter of percentage. It's like playing Frogger. So you ever played Frogger, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. So how do you know that you're getting better at Frogger, Joe?
When you don't get hit by a car.
When you don't get hit by a car as much.
Right.
Like everybody gets hit by a car, right? I mean, there's no such thing as like it's an endless game. You don't beat Frogger, right? It's like a roguelike essentially. Well, at least the newer versions are essentially like a roguelike. You don't beat it. You just go forever, right? And so the way you get better is you get hit by the truck less often. But you still get hit by the truck. So every time you do it, it's just like Jordan Poyer is going to make a mistake. He's the most veteran of veteran players. He's going to screw up sometimes. Dorian Williams is going to screw up more because he's younger. So what we do is we take execution errors and we blame them on coaching, and then we take coaching errors and blame them on coaching. Eventually, everything we have, every criticism we have rolls up to coaching, and it just can't be that way. We just can't. At some point, I was talking this with Josh Allen last week when he's missing run checks and he's not responding to pressure well. They're like, well, this is Dorsey's fault, dude. They teach you how to deal with a blitz in high school. Like at some point, you need to do this correctly. At some point, we need to assign to Josh Allen what's Josh Allen, assign to Ken Dorsey what's Ken Dorsey, and assign to Sean McDermott what's Sean McDermott. And to Roy's comment, it's really hard sometimes to separate out what Sean McDermott's involved in, what he's not involved in. That stuff gets really gray and kind of muddy sometimes. We just got to do our best to make sure that we're trying to acknowledge the muddiness when we see it, and we're making sure we're assigning to the players what is the players, and the coaches what is the coaches.
Yes, firmly agree on that, Bruce. We're friends again. But I do think at some point I'll say this. I do think, however, if a player is failing to execute and you continue to depend on the player and put them in positions where they're clearly not getting it, and it continues to hurt your team, and you could see, and again, you don't know, but you could see that this is a coach's reliance on the player figuring it out. Again, the failure to adapt or adjust, then you could start having the conversation. And like, again, Sean McDermott puts Dorian Williams in that New England game. Dorian Williams gets targeted and has some really ugly reps. So what does he do? Okay, Dorian, you got to sit. Tyrell's going in because we need to stop this. And that's where it's coaching.
And then we yell at the coaching for not letting him develop. There's no win. There is no win.
You just got to let him play. Dude, if they just let Kye Elum play, do you know how disastrous it would have been? They see how these people play in practice. I'm sorry that the player that got drafted in the first round didn't pan out. We wanted it to. Or, this player isn't panning out yet, but you can't put players that are very much showing they're not ready on a field and expect them to be ready. It just makes no sense. So I agree with that point, Bruce. I want to move this conversation on now to Mr. Ken Dorsey and the Bills offense. Because as much as Sean McDermott's been getting criticism, I think Ken Dorsey is some people's Halloween decoration this month. It has certainly been a month of highs and lows for the Bills offense with a lot of lows. A lot of lows that I think can be attributed, again, to multiple people, but I do think Dorsey has some involvement. I have had some criticisms of certain situational play calling, as well as maybe, again, like things that other members of Cover One have pointed out, but spacing on route concepts where too many people are sitting in one spot of the field and you're seeing hesitation to throw. I'm just curious, Bruce. Talk to me really about your overview of Ken Dorsey and this Bills offense this month.
Specifically this month, or just like as a whole?
You could do it whatever you're feeling, man. Let it rip.
So I have never felt as strongly positive about Ken Dorsey as some of the national media members. Like if you go and you watch the list of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL, like Ken Dorsey is usually top 5, top 6 offensive coordinators in the league. I don't feel that strongly positively about Ken Dorsey. I also don't hate him. Every single week something goes wrong in the offense because, like we talked about, execution coaching. I have specific things that I would like to see from Ken Dorsey that I hadn't up until recently. I did my last podcast, the Bruce exclusive, on this past Thursday. I had 6 things that I wanted to see from the Buffalo Bills moving forward. A chunk of them were Ken Dorsey things. And one of them was pace, which we saw. One of them was neutral pass rate, which we saw. One of them was Dalton Kincaid early on. I think it was very obvious week 1 when Dalton Kincaid played 80% of the snaps that he should be playing more than 50 and 55% of the snaps. The fact that it took you until a Dawson Knox injury to do that is I'm not going to go as far as say malpractice, but Dalton Kincaid has special skills in the receiving end. And I know that he got a holding penalty. I don't care. Oh, well, he made a mistake on this. I don't care. It's a net positive. The amount of positive that he brings you is infinitely more than the amount of negative he brings you. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that this would have fixed a lot of the 12 versus 11 conversation that we would have had if we would have made Dalton Kincaid the primary guy at tight end, because Kincaid versus Shakir is very different conversation than Knox versus Shakir. It's who are you giving up when you go from 12 to 11, and who is the defense putting on when you go from 12 to 11? That's the thing that matters right there. So I have meaningful criticisms of Ken Dorsey. The reason why it sometimes comes off like I'm a Ken Dorsey defender is specifically because we're not okay criticizing Josh Allen. And that bothers me a lot. It bothers me a ton that we as a fan base are just not okay. Like, unless he's throwing picks, like lots of picks, we're just afraid, because I don't think that we know what Ken Dorsey does versus what Josh Allen does. We assume results-based thing. Oh, we saw Josh Allen under pressure. It must be the O-line. Well, no. We saw Josh Allen, not get the ball out. It must be Ken Dorsey. It must be the O-line. Sometimes it's Allen, guys. In fact, a lot of the time it's Allen. And it's hilarious because we've seen this before in our past in Buffalo Bills fandom. We saw a bad offensive line that was quarterbacked by Ryan Fitzpatrick, who put his back foot on the ground and the ball was out. Ryan Fitzpatrick said, ball is going to go out. Like, period. Like, the ball's coming out. Let's go. And so then all of a sudden you switch quarterbacks and the offensive line looks garbage. And you're like, well, what's happening? It was the quarterback. It was always the quarterback. And so for me, I can have meaningful criticisms of Ken Dorsey, but still come off like a Dorsey defender, because other people are doing things like, Josh Allen specifically is doing things that need to be pointed out and they don't want to hear it. So I'm fine with Ken Dorsey. That's my official stance. Bruce is fine with Ken Dorsey. I'm not here to tell you that he's the best offensive coordinator in football. There are a handful of people I would much rather have. I'm not as high on him as the national media. I'm not nearly as low on him as a huge chunk of Bills fans.
And let's go ahead and, as fans and as people, I want to address this because I saw this actually happen on one of the other shows, and it was debatably one of the funniest things I've ever seen on a Cover One show. And that was when someone called Ant and Eric apologists because they were highlighting certain things Ken Dorsey did well. Let's stop calling people apologists when we give credit where credit is due, please. I think that is the most insane thing you can do as a fan. When a whole hour and a half has gone by of two men breaking down film to tell you the good and bad of an offense, and the takeaway you have is that someone is an apologist, I don't know what to tell you, man. I think the problem is a lot of how we evaluate Ken Dorsey. A lot of what it comes from a lot of portion of this fan base is revisionist history lensed by Brian Daboll. I think when we look back at the recency bias that exists when talking about Brian Daboll, it then skews the perspective of Ken Dorsey and his involvement in this offense and the quote-unquote regression that has happened with Josh Allen. Josh Allen's game is sporadic. It's explosive. It's chaos. It's Pandora's box. It is Chainsaw Man levels of hectic. Josh Allen is Chainsaw Man. He is the type of person that can play in structure and carry out day-to-day, whatever. But when you need him to turn on and go crazy, he will. But craziness is not always a good thing. There's bad that comes with it. And if you watch this Tampa Bay game on tape, you see examples of plays where Josh Allen does not execute the read the right way, but because he is a physical freak and can evade pressure, gets enough time to make a play happen. Two examples of this. And if you ever want to see a good breakdown of this apart from the film room, I've seen numerous film reviewers talk about this. One play is that Dalton Kincaid toe tap, Bruce. You remember this play. Everyone was excited. Dalton Kincaid makes an excellent catch. And that's fine. It's a great result. Latavius Murray was wide open on the top of the screen. And he looks that way. And if he hits that read, Latavius Murray probably has a first down, and it's much easier, less dangerous, and less likely to take contact, and less likely to put anyone in a position of injury. And here's the thing. If Josh Allen does this play and Kincaid drops it, or gets injured, who's getting blamed for it, Bruce? It's going to be Ken Dorsey, because people are going to see the failure in execution and think that the play was designed to have Josh roll left, get pressure, because they'll blame the O-line, and then make an inaccurate throw. And the reality is they wanted him to just sit in the pocket on first down. This is where I have a problem with the discourse. And this is where I think people need to, again, take a step back and breathe and assess the situation and look at the moving parts. How much of this is play design? How much of this is execution? How much of this is Josh Allen trying to make a play when he doesn't need to try because it's there? And if we can do that, I think we'll end up having much more nuanced discussions about Ken Dorsey, where we can see that there are high points, that some game plans have been very good, that there are some things he schemes up that work well. Bruce, in the New England game, when we talked about trying to add in some explosive components, the narrative around Josh Allen after that game and Ken Dorsey is that Josh Allen is being neutered. Meanwhile, people seem to forget Josh Allen not picking up blitzes, missing a wide open Stephon Diggs for what would have been a 60-yard touchdown to tie the game, and missing throws. And this is the problem, is we as fans have to be able to critique properly. We can praise people when they deserve praise, but no one is above blame. And that is including Ken Dorsey, that is including Sean McDermott, and that is including Josh Allen. And what I saw was from that New England game to Tampa, Josh Allen took strides to improve where he was lacking in certain parts of the game against New England. And I'm very happy about that. But I do think that when something goes wrong, we have to bite our tongues. Be upset with the result? Fine. I don't want them to stall out on drives. But let's not point at Ken Dorsey. Let's not point at Josh Allen immediately. Let's not point at anybody immediately. Let's just be upset that there was a failure in execution. And when we see the why, we can go from there. So, Bruce, any final thoughts on this offense before we carry on?
No final thoughts on I have tons of final thoughts on the offense, but we absolutely have to move on. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the thing I should have done a long time ago and just keep my mouth shut.
I never want to hear your mouth shut, Bruce. You are an excellent guest. I appreciate you. For everyone in the chat today, again, please throw a like on this video. It would mean the world to us. Please follow Bruce on Twitter. Listen to his podcast, The Bruce Exclusive. It is incredible. He is one of the best minds in Bills football, and I appreciate him taking the time to be here. And Bruce, I have to ask you one question, a very important question. The question is, do you like fantasy football?
You know, it's weird. I was out of the fantasy football space for a meaningful amount of time. So my wife and I used to play in a league together that was like a family and friends sort of league, but they were not as responsive as they should have been. And my wife was the commissioner, and so it stressed her out. So she's like, well, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so because she wasn't being the commissioner, we just didn't do it. And then a couple of years ago, Nate Geary reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to be part of a Dynasty fantasy football league? I said, what's Dynasty fantasy football? I don't know what that is. And so he invited me in, and it's a Bills media / content creation. Greg Tomset from Cover One is in it as well. And I absolutely fell in love with Dynasty. I would never go back to redraft. Right now, I'm only in one league. I'm in one league, and it's this league. That's it. That's all I'm in. So I'm the anti-Greg, right? Because
you're not in 100.
Yeah, he's in like 32 leagues or something like that. And I'm in one league, right? Beware the man who's in one league, because it's been 3 seasons now. I won the championship year 1. I won the championship year 2. I was in the championship and lost to Joe Marino last year because it was one of the game. It was the Cincinnati Damar Hamlin game. And I had Stephon Diggs and Joe Burrow, and they got cut off after the first quarter. So he was ahead by a good enough math that he probably would have won anyway, but you never know. Yeah. And so I've been in the championship 3 years in a row. So we're going on year 4. I absolutely love it. So
I'm glad you do, Bruce. And I hope everyone in this chat loves it as well, because I want to tell you all how to get some action on the NFL. And it's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite player stats, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Pick between 2 and 5 players to fill out your pick'em entry. Get every pick right and take home some cold, hard cash. Use the code COVER1 and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Thank you so much to Underdog Fantasy for being a partner with Cover One. And thank you so much to Bruce Nolan for being here as we move on to our next topic. And that next topic is talking about some trades. And it actually came out this morning, Bruce, that Kye Elum, he's a hot topic. Teams are looking at him and saying, hey, who's that guy? I'm a big fan. I kind of want to see what he's about. So let's ask this question to our chat, and I will ask it to you as well. But give me your thoughts on this. Kye Elum, the trade deadline, any moves the Bills could make, really just your whole kind of mindset during this process as we near the deadline.
I think that if you're going to trade Kye Elum, now is as good of a time as any. Like the longer that teams go between the draft and the time that player is available, the more deteriorated their opinion comes. And so if you have a team that has a second round grade on Kye Elum and it's been a year and a half and he doesn't look very good, they might still be willing to throw you a 4, right? Or a 5. But if you wait 2.5 years, now they're willing to trade you a conditional 7th, right? There is a deterioration because you want that to be fresh in their minds. The person who's acquiring the player, you want their scouting report to be fresh in their minds. We know that this is important. Like we know that teams carry their priors with them in a worse way sometimes than fans do. Like that's the reason why first round picks continue to get chances over and over and over and over again. So for me, if you're going to move him, you're not going to find a better time than now because it's only going to get worse from here. He's probably not going to rebuild. You don't come back from being inactive in favor of Josh Norman. Like you don't bounce back from that. There is no, let's wait until he pops and then we'll trade him because he ain't going to pop at this point. It's not going to happen. So I think moving is probably the best thing for the Buffalo Bills at this point. And I just don't know why the Buffalo Bills took a player that was a press man corner in coverage and didn't put a clock on him, knowing that it was gonna take him a while. Like they should just said from the beginning, listen, he's a press man corner in college. It's gonna take him a while. Like zone spacing is a thing. But instead, you saw a little bit of flash. You saw, he was kind of platooning, and then he wasn't playing at all, and then he got demoted, and then it was a really messy situation. Like there was not a smooth development curve with Kye Elum at all. It's best for the team at this point to just move on. Now, as far as acquiring a player, if there's a defensive tackle out there or a linebacker out there, I want him.
Yeah,
because you said that the loss of Daquan Jones and the loss of Matt Milano, I mean, you're losing all pro caliber players. I'm not saying that you're going to get all pro caliber players. You're not. But the drop off could be minimized because I don't want to see Jordan Phillips play a lot of one tech. Now, I thought Poona Ford played admirably at one tech, but I'd like some defensive tackle reinforcements, and I'd like to not be required to play 3 safety. I really like the 3 safety looks the Buffalo Bills rolled out with Jordan Poyer in the box. But if you can find an off-ball linebacker, I mentioned Josie Jewell from the Denver Broncos, right? He's on the list as far as trade targets go. So I'm primarily looking at one tech, defensive tackle, and linebacker.
Agreed firmly with your points about Elum. I think at this point, the best thing you can do for not only the Bills, but for Kye Elum is give him a new start. I think they banked on upside. I think it's as simple as, hey, first and foremost, I think they had a different target in mind in that draft that got taken from them. You know who I'm talking about, Trent McDuffie.
I do.
I think that they wanted him. He went, did have a first round evaluation on Elum, even if he didn't totally fit. They liked the traits and the physicality, thought they could mold him. They tried, and it just simply didn't work. And we'd be more pressed about it, but Christian Benford has been excellent and a revelation for the secondary. I thought he had a fantastic game against Tampa Bay. I think he's continuing to improve each week. I think Dane Jackson deserves credit. Therefore, I think you can get away with trading Elum. Also, just a plug here, Greg Thompson last night did a trade deadline extravaganza. After you're done watching this show, I implore you to watch that because there is a lot of excellent ideas there that could benefit the Bills. But Bruce, I agree with you as far as who I'm attacking. IDL, off-ball linebacker, and even cornerback. I think that you could find someone in that list that he had mentioned that is affordable, that could help you that could present some more stability in the interior. We did have a good game. I'm not banking the rest of the season on one good Thursday night game. I think I need to see more security at those positions. And that's where I think they're going to go with it. I think they'll inquire about some of these DTs, some corners, some LBs. Josie Jewell is always a great example. Also, I think it's Sean Murphy bunting in Tennessee is another example that I think Greg mentioned. That's another great option. There was another name I'm blanking on now, but off-ball linebacker as well. There's options out there that they could look into that I think they will. If they want to add to the receiver room too, I don't think they need to now, but I also think, again, it's one Thursday game. Maybe they still feel that they need that component. Might try to implore about a D-Hop. I don't know. I think Bean will always check into the talent, but really, yeah, I think you said it best. That's where I think they should attack it, given the injuries they're dealing with, given the time that they have to wait for Matt Milano and Daquan Jones and Trey White, obviously. But I do think that they have talent in the room. And as far as Kye Elum goes, it doesn't feel like he's ever going to get a true shot in this defense. And yes, having Josh Norman come out of ARP and be able to play in this defense is, first and foremost, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening. And second, the fact that he's doing this over a 23-year-old cornerback, it's just not boding well for Kye Elum. I think the best thing you can do as an organization and for the player is move on, find a trade partner, and see if you can put Elam in a new team where maybe his skill set's more valued and he's actually able to develop into the corner he's known to be. But ultimately, Bruce, any final thoughts on trade deadline before we move on?
No, I'm good.
All right, man. So my final topic for you today, Bruce, before we let you go, is how do the Bills overcome these injuries? And we did just talk about trade deadline, but obviously trade deadline is limited. The Bills are cap strapped. There's only so much you could feasibly do this season before you have to hit a wall and say, this is what we're dealing with. What do you think Sean McDermott can do to overcome the injuries on this defense during the rest of the year?
One of the things I think you've already seen, and that is understand that your biggest weakness for the linebacker position is on long and late downs, and make sure you go to three safeties on that look. I think you're seeing that. In fact, I know this is blasphemy to say, but I would be in favor of more of it. Like even on early downs, I trust Jordan Poyer to not get his head spinning when the offense throws motion shifting at him. I trust Jordan Poyer to do that. So if you want to throw Jordan Poyer in the box and just go dime on early downs too, I'm fine with that. Jordan Poyer's ability to close from distance has been one of his most underrated traits and something that is extremely hard to do in the NFL. People just, as a safety, okay, when you are trying to run the alley and close from distance, I cannot possibly tell you how difficult that is. Like, it's so hard to do. Like, we all know that playing quarterback's the hardest. Playing tight end's probably the second hardest. I think closing from distance and a ball carrier coming down the alley at you and making a tackle is like right up there. Yeah. And Jordan Poyer was able to do it from 20 yards back. It's actually easier for him to do it from 8 yards back. So I'm completely fine if you just want to go three safety a huge chunk of the time, because I trust Jordan Poyer to be able to make those decisions in the run game and also be able to understand that there's going to be shifting, there's going to be motions, your eyes are going to be in the right spot, and things are going to happen a little bit faster for you, but they're not going to happen as fast for you as Jordan Poyer as subjectively they're happening for Dorian Williams, the rookie. So yeah, things are really happening really fast for Dorian Williams. And yeah, they'll happen faster for Jordan Poyer because he's closer to the line of scrimmage, but it's still going to be better. So for me, I'd like to even lean more into the three safety looks on defense. As far as defensive tackle goes, you cannot play Jordan Phillips at one tech. You just can't do it. You just can't. I don't want to see it at all. I don't want to see a single snap. I understand that your other option is Tim Settle, right? I get that. I want to see Eli Anku. I want to see Poona Ford. Those are the players I want to see at one tech. That's it. And if you happen to trade for somebody, then great. Let's trade for him and plug him in there. But I don't want to see what I saw on tape against the New England Patriots ever again. I love Jordan Phillips as a third down rotational interior pass rusher where he can come in and just mess crap up. Just do it. Just say, hey, you know what, man? Go nuts. Like, that's what I want him to be. Just do not say, hey, would you be willing to anchor against this double team? People think because you're big, that means you're good against the run, and that's not true. So when it comes to one tech, that's what I want to see.
Yeah. If you were big and good against the run, then there wouldn't be a bad DT in the league. It's just Jordan Phillips is a pass rushing DT. That's what he is. That's what he's good at. Keep him in those positions. And I think getting back Elianku is great because you have someone who's proven that he's actually very capable in running defense, playing that spot. To pair him with the depth behind Poona Ford going with Ed Oliver, I'm really glad they brought him back. And I'm very encouraged by that. I think keep Phillips to his strength. And yeah, again, the dimebacker looks were excellent. Jordan Poyer being able to play up. First and foremost, I love what that does just for him because he doesn't have to rely on his speed as much as he was. And again, he's never been the fastest guy. But when you talk about him getting older and maybe that being more of a point of emphasis, now Jordan Poyer has the opportunity to kind of limit how much field he's taking. But also, he's so instinctive and so intelligent that he really is just another linebacker in this defense when you put him in that spot. And then you get Micah Hyde, who's still playing the back end really well, with Taylor Rapp, who I also think is promising and developing each week as we speak. I think this puts less pressure on Dorian Williams so that when he comes in, there's more time for him to kind of process what he's seeing on the field, recognize it, and maybe play better when he gets in. But yeah, that's really ultimately what I agree with, Bruce. I think when you have this formation now on defense and you've seen it work, I think you can get away with it. And if they decide to make a trade, great. But if not, I do think that these dime looks have been successful for other teams in the NFL, most notably the New England Patriots. I think it could work for Buffalo as well because they have a very intelligent safety room and not only great safeties, but good corners that can complement it as well. So I can't really think of much more to say on that topic, Bruce, but I know you got to run. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to give us some final thoughts and plug anything you got going on before we let you go today.
Final thoughts. Expectations minus reality equals disappointment. And try to be silly today. Those are my final thoughts. Be silly. What we do is we don't ever do things that make us happy. We don't surround ourselves with people who make us happy. We don't watch things that are happy. We don't listen to things that are happy. And then we go, why am I not happy? Why am I not happy? Be silly today. Sing in the car. Dance with your wife in the kitchen. Be silly. I promise you it will help. And I want you to have joy. So that's my final thought for today. If you, for some reason, have listened to me ramble today and thought, I want more of that guy, then you can find my show, The Bruce Exclusive, on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. It drops every Thursday morning. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. Joe, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me and taking the time.
I appreciate you, Bruce. Thank you for being here. And real fast before I sign off, Carl, thank you so much for this. We really appreciate it. Guys, your donations, your views, your interactions mean the world to not only me, but this network. And seeing things like this is just so rewarding, and I appreciate it immensely. So thank you all for the chats today, the discussion, the discourse. Bruce, again, thank you for being here. Carl, I'm going to read this and then we'll sign off. Thoughts on Damar Hamlin's return to Cincy active? I don't know about being active, but I do know that it's going to be an emotional return for him. But I'm also thinking like Damar Hamlin seems like a guy who's been through hell and back. And I think he's established a tough mindset and able to kind of overcome these obstacles. I don't think him being in Cincinnati is going to really play to how they view him as active or inactive. But I do think it'll be emotional for him. But ultimately, if he decides that he's ready to go and they want to play him, I don't think there's going to be any hesitation or drop off from Mr. Damar Hamlin. So that is my thought on that. Bruce, again, thank you so much. If you want to find me and if you somehow enjoyed what I was saying, which why would you? My name is Joe DeRosa. You could find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa, where I tweet of all things football and random things that you don't care about. But ultimately, you were all great today. I hope you all have a wonderful Halloween. Enjoy yourselves. Wear a fun costume. Again, be silly. Go prank your friends. It'd be really funny. And I know it'd bring a lot of positivity to everybody on this holiday season. For Bruce Nolan, my name is Joe DeRosa. I appreciate you all. I'll be back next weekend with another fun preview show. But in the meantime, have a great, great Halloween and go Bills.